Back now with our special CBS Evening News live coverage of the attack on America from CBS News World Headquarters in New York. It began just before 9 a.m. in New York City rush hour. First, one of the twin towers of the 110-story World Trade Center was hit by a hijacked jetliner. Then the other suffered the same fate. A huge fireball blew all the way through the South Tower. You may want to watch here as the second plane hits. Minutes later, near Washington, a similar attack, a hijacked airliner attack on the Pentagon. A third jetliner crashed near the U.S. military headquarters, setting it aflame. And then in western Pennsylvania, not far from the presidential retreat at Camp David, Maryland, but in southwestern Pennsylvania, a fourth hijacked jet went down. Back in New York City, the unimaginable. After burning for more than an hour, the Trade Center towers collapsed. First one, and then the other. Thousands of concrete and steel thundered down in an avalanche on other buildings and into the streets, where firefighters and police were working frantically to help the countless victims. Some of the early victims of this were rescue workers. And then, after fire had raged inside for hours and smoke bellowed through side streets and along the great avenues, yet another major building in the trade complex fell. And tonight, Lower Manhattan, the financial center of the world, lies in ruins. In the nation's capital, a state of emergency and an emergency plan now in effect to keep the federal government running in an orderly way. Congressional leaders were taken to secure locations. The U.S. Capitol complex was evacuated and closed. CBS's Bob Schieffer was among the evacuees. Bob?
Well, Dan, this is something that Washington took very hard, maybe as hard as anything that's ever hit it. First, there was just the shock of seeing those pictures that were coming down from New York, the pictures you've been describing. But second, there was the realization that terrorism for real is for real, and that it could and was happening here. Near panic broke out at the Capitol when rumors spread another airliner was headed there. Pages ran. Senators were understandably perplexed.
Let's get away from the building, ladies and gentlemen.
Nothing like this had ever happened. As police blocked off the area, smoke from the Pentagon miles away could already be seen. Stunned members and aides made their way to the lawn. The Senate chaplain paused to pray.
Gracious Lord, spread a spirit of calm among us.
In a security procedure never before used, the congressional leaders were helicoptered to a secret location. Those who stayed behind could look to the skies and see U.S. fighter planes as they roared past the Capitol.
They had scrambled F-16 fighter aircraft to cope with any potential threat.
Workers were sent home, heavy security went into effect, and police closed off the city of Washington to outsiders.
Okay, you must be a resident of D.C., emergency personnel or medical to get into the city today.
Parts of the city took on the look of a ghost town. National monuments were blocked off and closed to the public. Information was scarce, but as congressmen emerged from briefings, it was clear a sense of quiet outrage had settled over the national capital.
It's another Pearl Harbor for this country.
We're very vulnerable. I think this is a wake-up call for America, a sobering call.
We send the word out particularly to those who have planned and committed these horrific acts that America is strong, America is principled, America is united.
And Dan, that Washington of yesterday, which was the scene of all that partisan fighting, all that was long ago and far away. This is a different city tonight, a city that is slowly realizing this nation is at war.
Bob Schieffer in Washington. This nation at war, a war of terrorism, a war fought in the shadows and then with bursts into the open, as was the case today. Joining us now from our CBS News Washington Bureau is the former Secretary of State for the United States of America, Madeleine Albright. Madam Secretary, thanks for being with us. How surprised are you about this attack today?
Well, we're all appalled, and as I watch all these pictures, Dan, we've all seen them all day long, and they are surreal. And watching the buildings come down and the attacks on Washington has been the nightmare scenario that people have feared for so long. I have to say, Dan, I ache for America tonight. We are a strong country, and I have faith that we will overcome this, but this is a huge challenge, and America must rise to the challenge.
Did you ever anticipate an attack of this scope?
We always, people talk about horrendous scenarios, but I don't think anybody has ever contemplated all the various pieces of this. As you have said, it is a highly sophisticated operation.
Who do you think was behind it?
I'm not going to speculate on that. You've been very careful in the coverage that I've seen, and I know that there are some reports that you are presenting, or your people, that it's Osama bin Laden. I think it's very important for us to get all the facts straight and investigate it and be sure. And I think calmness has to prevail, despite the fact that this is a highly emotional time for all of us, especially for the families of the victims.
And when it comes time to retaliate, when we have the facts, how will the United States retaliate?
Well, I think, again, we have the strongest military in the world with the finest servicemen and women. We have said in the past that we would retaliate at a time and place of our own choosing. I have complete faith in the military of the United States and in the leadership of America, and we all stand united. This is the ultimate evil, and I think that what is so essential is that the world leaders have already made their statements very clear in support of the United States. This is one of those horrendous events that actually may become a truly unifying factor in trying to deal with this ultimate evil.
Madam Secretary, to those who say, look, this is a direct result, perhaps unavoidable, but a direct result of the United States being so involved in the Middle East, you say what?
I say for only those who do not believe in democracy and human rights can a statement like that be made, because the United States has stood tall, has tried to deal with the horrendous problems, has done it in an honest way, and I am proud of American policies.
Madam Secretary, ride with me here for just a moment, because word from the White House is that President Bush is going to speak to the American people tonight before what has already been announced. It was previously announced he'd be speaking at 9 o'clock tonight Eastern Time, 8 Central, 6 on the far Pacific coast. President Bush, now inside the White House, is moving up that time schedule. We don't know exactly when he's going to speak, but we are told that he will be speaking before 9 o'clock Eastern Time. So you may want to stay here with us to hear what the President says to the nation in his first major address. He's spoken to the country twice today, but both times shortly, brief remarks in Florida, then somewhat expanded remarks on videotape in Shreveport, Louisiana. But very soon, we're told, possibly soon, I should rephrase that, certainly before 9 o'clock, we're now advised the President's going to be talking. Now back to our conversation with the former Secretary of State for the United States, Madeleine Albright, and thank you for understanding about that, Madam Secretary. Madam Secretary, when you were in the inner councils of the Clinton administration, and it was decided to strike back at Osama bin Laden after the bombings of our embassies in East Africa, any second thoughts about the sending of those cruise missiles?
No second thoughts. We based our decision on facts that we had. For me, my worst moment as Secretary of State was the bombings of our embassies, and then going to pick up the bodies of those that had died, and also talking to the victims, the Kenyans and the Tanzanians. We had a responsibility to respond. We did it on the basis of facts, and we were at the beginning, I think, of what is this truly horrendous event when events abroad come home to America. And we have to stand tall. America cannot be shut down.
Former Secretary of State for the United States of America, Madeleine Albright, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dan.
Now, there's going to be another briefing in Washington coming up soon. We'll carry that for you live, of course. But in the time we have remaining before that briefing starts, let's talk about the casualties from today's attacks. So much is still unknown. The 4 hijacked jetliners carried more than 250 people. We believe that figure to be 261. It could be a little more, a little less. And it must be assumed that all aboard those 4 hijacked planes are dead. So you start with at least 250, probably slightly more dead aboard the hijacked airliners. The Defense Department says, quote, about 100 were killed or injured at the Pentagon. David Martin says that it's widely believed at the Pentagon that that figure will increase, and perhaps significantly. It is far more difficult to account for the thousands who were in the target zone in Lower Manhattan, the World Trade Center area, and the emergency workers who rushed to aid them. Keep in mind, 50,000 people work in the World Trade Center tower in that area. Thousands more visited every day, and then today they flooded in police, fire, and other rescue workers fairly quickly. CBS News medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon is at New York University Hospital tonight. Elizabeth.
Dan, within moments of hearing the news, New York City area hospitals and indeed hospitals throughout the region shut down all normal operations, canceled all elective surgeries, and basically transformed themselves into high-voltage trauma centers for a city under siege. Once the severity of injuries was assessed at emergency command posts at the site, dust-covered ambulances ferried those in the worst shape to whatever hospitals could take them.
No idea how many people and cops are dead. We have many people hurt.
What about the casualties? What have you seen?
Uncountable.
Bellevue, one of the city's biggest trauma centers, treated injured when the World Trade Towers were bombed back in 1993. Today, it was deja vu. And despite the enormity of this disaster, the hospital says it was ready.
We've set up intensive care units. We're utilizing that area as sort of an offshoot of the emergency department. Just looking at every place in this hospital where patients could be taken care of, and we assign doctors and nurses to those areas to be ready for the patients as they come in.
Early in the day, the numbers started low, but by afternoon, it was clear the scope of devastation would be unfathomable.
As excavating goes on at the sites, we're going to probably, as we've been told, going to see a lot more.
Doctors anticipated every type of injury, everything from burns and smoke inhalation to head trauma, and a tremendous need for blood. In a situation where many felt utterly helpless, that was one way to contribute. An early call for blood led to lines of donors.
We anticipate a tremendous need for blood, so we actually set up several blood donor areas within the hospital for staff to donate. We've now run out of the donor bags for people to donate blood.
Again, Dan, and as you mentioned, the census here, we are only just beginning to tally the number of injured. In fact, several of the doctors here told me that the injured they're seeing are, in fact, the emergency workers, the firemen and police who were called to the initial plane crash and then were injured when the buildings collapsed. Another major concern, of course, is not just handling the physical wounds, but the psychological trauma of witnessing and surviving such a catastrophe, and that is likely to yield thousands more victims in need of medical assistance, perhaps for years and years to come. Dan?
Elizabeth Caledon reporting live from New York University Hospital. The shock waves from the attack on America are being felt far beyond the immediate targets in New York and in our nation's capital, Washington. CBS News correspondents are standing by with that part of the story, beginning with Cynthia Bowers in Chicago. Cynthia, good evening.
Dan, as news of this catastrophic attack spread here in the Chicago area, so did the sense no place is secure.
I was scared. I was very scared.
Within minutes of the first reports, nearly 20,000 people poured out of the Sears Tower, the nation's tallest building, afraid it too was a target.
I would say a sense of anxiety, of nervousness, and people were anxious to leave the building.
Evacuations were ordered in the famed Chicago Loop, including the Board of Trade.
Everyone's concerned. You could see the look on their face.
One by one, federal buildings, museums, and colleges closed down. Extra trains were put on the tracks to get hundreds of thousands of people out of the downtown center, under the watchful eyes of military jets, with hundreds of police on the streets below.
Every sworn personnel in the Chicago Police Department, from the superintendent on down, will remain in uniform until further notice.
Security is so tight across the Midwest, passengers on this Delta jet in Cleveland were evacuated, while authorities made sure a threatened bomb was not on board. As business ground to a halt in Cleveland, workers heading home clogged roadways. Landmarks like the Arch in St. Louis were emptied.
I just felt like better than sitting home watching that, and this helped me feel like I'm doing something.
And blood banks began to fill as the enormity of this catastrophe started to hit home.
I think we need to pray for our country and pray for our president because, you know, this is the national crisis that people have been talking about for years.
With Americans feeling so vulnerable, officials here in Chicago and everywhere tonight are walking a fine line between taking the necessary precautions without creating additional panic. Dan.
Cynthia Bowers in Chicago. And of course, buildings, some monument-type buildings were closed in Philadelphia. Los Angeles on high alert around Los Angeles International Airport, and so it went today. Now, a briefing is scheduled inside the White House. This is the first actual briefing inside the White House we've had today. This will be Tommy Thompson, former governor of Wisconsin, who's now the Director of Health and Human Services in the Bush administration, John Ashcroft, the one-time senator from Missouri, who is now Attorney General, and FEMA Director Joe Albaugh. We take you live to the White House briefing room.
Mineta and Director Albaugh will each be providing you with updates on how their agencies are responding to today's events, as we'll be giving you as frequent as updates as possible. They will not be taking questions at this time. And with that, I will turn it over to General Ashcroft.
Thank you. Today, America has experienced one of the greatest tragedies ever witnessed on our soil. These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They are an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring the people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international Legat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information they know about these crimes to that website. It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for family and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy.
Every single American lost something today. And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and their families. It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort for the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that it's been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
One of the most cherished freedoms is the freedom of movement, the ability to move freely and safely. But today that freedom was attacked. But we will restore that freedom throughout the national transportation system as soon as possible, and we will restore the highest possible degree of service. These terrorist acts are designed to steal the confidence of Americans. We will restore that confidence. We have already taken some first steps as a precaution.
And so while this is going on at the White House, this is what's happening at the Capitol of the United States. Janet Hassert, the Speaker of the House, has begun talking as congressmen and senators gather.
One thing
that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country. We, as a Congress and as a government, stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder. Perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet. But we have our suspicions. And when that is justified and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the president, we will stand with this government, and we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you.
Now on the steps of the Capitol, Tom Daschle, the Senate Majority Leader.
Today's despicable acts were an assault on our people and on our freedom. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow. And we will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice. We, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the president and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost.
We know, as a nation, we've said our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We'd ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you.
Live from Washington on the steps of the Capitol of the United States, literally hundreds of members of Congress. We can't say that every member of Congress in the House and Senate was there, but hundreds were there in a show of solidarity and support, a show of unity in the face of a sneak attack, the second in the lifetime of many of us, a sneak attack on the United States, this time by the shadowy personages who are part of the terrorism operation. There are a number of terrorism operations in the world. Osama bin Laden has been the focal point since 1998 of U.S. intelligence suspicions, but we've said it before, we repeat it without apology. No one knows who is responsible for these dastardly acts today. 3 of the World Trade Center buildings, the 2 Twin Towers and Building 7, destroyed at the World Trade Center. The Pentagon, dead, wounded, and destruction there. Now, coverage of the attack on America continues, including President Bush's address shortly, so stay right here with us. Continuing now our live CBS Evening News coverage of the attack on America from CBS News World Headquarters in New York. 4 commercial jets hijacked and deliberately crashed today. 3 of them hit buildings, 2 the World Trade Center Twin Towers. A third hit the Pentagon. The 4th hijacked airliner went down in southwestern Pennsylvania. New York's towering World Trade Center reduced to rubble. The Pentagon smashed and smoking. Uncounted thousands of people apparently dead or injured. In New York, it's described as a catastrophe in terms of dead and wounded. The figures are unknown. Here's what's happening right now. Rescue workers are scrambling through the war zone remains of Lower Manhattan as well as the Pentagon itself. On a normal day, up to 50,000 people worked in the Twin Towers alone, and many thousands of visitors went through each day. Casualty figures elsewhere include the more than 250 passengers and crew on the 4 hijacked jets, and perhaps 100 dead and injured, at least at the Pentagon. But there are few places in the air tonight anywhere in the United States. There are few planes in the air anywhere, because the FAA has grounded all civilian aircraft until at least noon tomorrow. Nothing is supposed to fly until at least noon tomorrow, when the FAA will have some further information. By the way, the stock exchanges will also be closed tomorrow. President Bush will address the nation from Washington tonight. It originally was scheduled for 9 o'clock Eastern Time. We're told that that will be moved up some. Exactly when the president has now decided to speak, we do not know. We expect it at any time, and we will, of course, carry it live here. President Bush has already promised to, quote, find and punish whoever carried out these cowardly attacks, and federal officials say, not all of the intelligence agencies, but some federal officials say they, quote, strongly suspect that renegade Saudi millionaire Osama bin Laden may have been involved, but there's no confirmation of that whatsoever. And if you're concerned about hearing some reports of U.S. missile strikes in Kabul, Afghanistan, didn't happen. According to senior U.S. officials, what happened in Kabul, Afghanistan, the pictures of explosion and fire there, had nothing to do with any U.S. missile attacks. There haven't been any U.S. missile attacks. While at least one news organization reported that missiles had hit Kabul, Afghanistan, it turns out to be not true. CBS News correspondent Scott Pelley is at the site of today's attacks in Lower Manhattan tonight. And as night falls, Scott, what's the situation there?
Dan, as you can see, the smoke is still rising on Lower Manhattan Island as night falls here. We have spent most of the day with firemen, paramedics, and police officers near the World Trade Center towers. One of the firefighters told us that he didn't see any bodies in the area. He just saw pieces of bodies. Pieces of bodies, he told us, in the street, on the sidewalks. I asked him if he could give us some idea of how many bodies, and he just shook his head sadly and said, far too numerous to have any idea. We have spent a great deal of time with the firefighters. They all describe a scene of overwhelming devastation near Ground Zero at the base of the World Trade Center towers. Firefighters describe bodies in the streets, bodies on the sidewalks, pieces of bodies everywhere. One New York City police chief said, no one has ever seen anything like this unless they were at Dresden in World War II.
It's a terrible thing. It's like the world is evil, definitely.
1 block from the base of the World Trade Center tower, the inferno burned 4 hours after the attack. Police cars, the first to respond, were incinerated by the collapse of the second tower. Many firefighters and officers were wounded in the collapse, perhaps killed. No one can say how many.
No idea how many people, cops are dead. Many people hurt.
What about the casualties? What have you seen?
Uncountable. Let's go, let's go.
Courageous firefighters responded from all over New York City, called from off-duty, called from vacation. Renee Davila was the first EMS supervisor at the scene.
I was there, and I saw the building collapse. We all started running. I ended up inside the Hilton somewhere. I was like trapped. I don't know where I was. I couldn't find my way out with all the smoke and the debris in there. I finally just closed the door behind me and covered it so no more smoke and debris would come in. And what I did was I called my wife. I told her I love her.
Anybody want to volunteer?
Many New Yorkers rushed downtown to volunteer. These construction workers were from Iron Workers Local 40. What's the job in there?
Whatever it is, to save somebody, one person saved is a life saved.
Through the day, an inferno raged in World Trade Center Building Number 7, another massive office tower. Firefighters feared that it would collapse, and a little more than 8 hours after the attack, the abandoned building fell. 47 stories in the street. This is what's left of the carefully organized files and lives that were the World Trade Center. Bits of paper blasted into the street, construction dust an inch or 2 inches deep everywhere you look. What's eerie about this place now, several hours after the initial disaster, is just how quiet it is. You don't hear any ambulances racing away from the World Trade Center anymore.
I saw many injuries.
Hundreds, thousands.
My eyesight did not see hundreds and thousands. I know that my heart and my brain tells me they were hundreds.
One of the sites that we noticed near Ground Zero tonight, it is Election Day in New York City, a primary election. And near a community center, someone had handwritten a sign that said, "Vote here." Right below that sign, someone had scrawled another that said, "Emergency shelter." Dan?
Scott Pelley in Lower Manhattan. The primary mayoral election in New York was canceled today. The White House has now informed us that President Bush, moving up his time to speak, is now scheduled to speak to the American public, and for that matter to the world, at 8:30 Eastern Time. Less than an hour from now. 8:30 Eastern Time, President Bush will be addressing the nation. That, of course, will be 7:30 in the Central Time Zone, and even earlier, of course, out west. 8:30 now, the time for the President's address. One thing that Attorney General Ashcroft mentioned that my colleague Anthony Mason picked up on, one piece of new information out of that briefing. Ashcroft said that the first plane to hit the World Trade Center, that was American Airlines Flight 11, which is taken off from Boston, was supposed to go to Los Angeles. Attorney General Ashcroft said that that plane, they believe, was hijacked through the use of knives or knives kind of equipment. Now, that would correspond to an earlier report when someone said Barbara Olson, not someone in authority, said that Barbara Olson, the wife of the Solicitor General of the United States, who was aboard the plane that hit the Pentagon, that she, on cell phone, had described the skyjackers, the hijackers, these terrorists, as trying to take over the plane with knife-like instruments. So now we have two reports on what the Attorney General based his saying that the first plane was also hijacked by knives. We do not know, but now there are indications that at least two of the planes, at a minimum in the early stages, were hijacked with the use of knives or knives-like equipment of some kind. Now, the World Trade Center is in the heart of Lower Manhattan's financial district. It's one reason it was selected as a symbolic target. The attack not only toppled the once majestic towers, it also staggered the struggling U.S. economy and the stock markets. CBS News business correspondent Anthony Mason is here with that part of the story. Anthony, put this in perspective for us.
Dan, to begin with, all U.S. markets were closed today and will remain closed tomorrow. Make no mistake, among the primary targets of this attack were both the financial community and our economy. The floor of the New York Stock Exchange, which has been closed at least through tomorrow, is just a few blocks from the World Trade Center. The major investment firm, Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, was the Trade Center's primary tenant, leasing 50 floors. The financial services firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, had 1,000 employees headquartered near the top of the first tower to be hit. Many Wall Street firms are still trying to account for their employees tonight, and economists are trying to assess the damage to our economy.
This is a very serious event. It's economic shocks that come out of the blue that ultimately send us into economic recessions, and this certainly qualifies as a shock of immense proportion. It's a nationwide disaster, and it could have very serious economic ramifications for a long time to come.
A shock to an economy already in trouble, to an economy kept afloat by consumers whose confidence has become increasingly fragile. The last comparable shock came a decade ago when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and the economy was badly wounded.
The Gulf War hit. It made us all very nervous. We lost confidence. We stopped spending. We stopped investing, and a recession did occur. So the similarities are there, and it's very, very possible that today's events could be the proximate cause for the next economic recession.
Some economists are convinced a global recession is now a fait accompli. Overseas markets, which remained open today, all plummeted. London was off 5%. Frankfurt was down 9%. When the U.S. markets finally reopen, many expect they will be hit hard, too. This economy has been walking a tightrope for months. And as Wells Fargo's chief economist said today, the terrorist just cut the wire. Dan?
Anthony Mason, of course, our main concern is not money, not financial markets. It's those people who are dead and wounded. But holding to the moment, to this, the financial aspects of this, you've said that markets we know they'll be closed tomorrow. Beyond that, we don't know, but you would not be surprised to see them closed beyond that. What is the effect of these markets being closed?
Well, economists say just like it's important for the president to be back in the White House symbolically, it's important for the markets to reopen, to show that America is back to business as usual. That's very difficult. There are a lot of stock market employees who are unaccounted for this evening. So it's hard to get back to business as usual, but psychologically, we need to do that to send a message to the world. And that's why they're hoping that as soon as they can, the markets will reopen.
Anthony, you spoke to one of the traders who was in the World Trade Center this morning. What did he tell you?
He was on the 84th floor of the second tower when the first plane hit the first tower. He was ordered to evacuate, and he did. He got down as far as the 50th floor, and in that second tower, they were actually told in the stairwell, they were given an all clear and said, the building is secure. He told me that some employees at that point actually left the stairwell, got on the elevator to go back up to work in the second tower. Within minutes, the second plane hit the second tower. He was down to the 30th floor at that point. He told me, he said, I thought my life was over, and I thought I was never going to see my children again. But he said panic, there was no panic in the stairwell. People kept going down, he made it out. But when I last talked to him, he said the head trader on his floor was still unaccounted for.
Anthony Mason, thanks. Not everybody made it out, we know. It was confirmed by several eyewitness accounts. One man and woman forced to leap from a very high floor who went down hand in hand. This just in, a firefighters union official in New York, unidentified as far as I can determine, says, quote, there may be up to 200 firefighters, New York firefighters, dead. That's a direct quote. And let me underscore, as we've tried to do throughout this day, this terrible day, that while this is from someone in a position to know, there's no way to confirm this information. And also by the very nature of what he said, and specifically what this firefighters union official said, he said there may be up to 200 firefighters dead. Now, it's not a chaotic situation in all of New York or even all of Manhattan, but it remains a very dangerous situation in lower Manhattan. A large section of lower Manhattan has been completely sealed off, and there have been people ordered to evacuate even as night was falling. So it'll be a long time until we know, but here's another indication that we should be prepared for a very high death toll. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani began trying to prepare public opinion for that earlier in the day. We can hope and pray the death toll will not be anywhere near what's expected, but we should be prepared with that sort of steady determination that Americans are famous for mounting in the face of crisis, for a very high death toll when you have a firemen's union official talking about even the possibility of as many as 200 firefighters being dead. I emphasize again that that is unconfirmed, that is not an official figure, it is a speculative figure. Now, keeping in mind that all civilian aircraft remain grounded tonight, no airport in America is immune this evening from the fear that the East Coast crashes spawned, and that certainly includes the West Coast field that was the destination of so many of the doomed passengers. Sandra Hughes is at Los Angeles International Airport. Sandra?
Dan, California did not go untouched by these horrendous acts of terrorism. With all 4 flights en route to this state, there will be many, many California victims. Families of the American Airlines victims, surrounded by tight security, were whisked to a private area to be counseled by grief specialists from the airline and the Salvation Army.
There's very little that one can say at a time like this. We simply want to be with them and to comfort them as best we can.
But some people just needed to hold on. Confused passengers looking for guidance stood stunned. Most turned away as all domestic flights were canceled. International flights were to be diverted to nearby Ontario Airport until it closed too.
And then I got here and I read the board and everything was canceled. So I was like, okay. So yeah, I have no idea what I'm gonna do.
Most had just heard the news of the plane crashes and wondered how many had been killed. The scene was chaotic. Police tape held back anyone who tried to get inside the United Terminal as the LAPD bomb squad suited up outside. At a nearby power plant, a suspicious package brought panic. It was nothing. By mid-morning, the entire airport was evacuated.
The FAA mandated early on that we close down LAX and Ontario airports in California, which we have done.
Now, 2,000 flights per day come through the Los Angeles airport. Officials here had said they hope to reopen the airport sometime tomorrow, but they're waiting for official word from the FAA. Dan?
Sandra Hughes at Los Angeles International Airport reporting live. Thank you. Those of you in our television and radio audience may want to recall that at the time of the Millennium celebrations, there was, in effect, a near miss that some terrorists attempted to cross from the Canadian border into the United States, and it turned out that what they had hoped to do is to cause some explosions at Los Angeles International Airport. Thanks to the alertness of some U.S. border officials, they caught one of the members of that terrorist conspiracy and exposed the whole conspiracy. That in the background of what happened today, and one additional reason there was so much nervousness around Los Angeles International Airport this day. Now, Jim Axelrod, CBS News correspondent who's been on this story since the very beginning this morning, has a rooftop view of what's happening tonight and some additional information. Jim?
Dan, less than 4 miles behind me is where the Twin Towers stood this morning, but not tonight. Ground zero, as it's being described in today's terror attacks that have sent aftershocks rippling across the country. The sign is at the Atlanta airport. National emergency. Airport closed. But it could have been anywhere in America today.
I'm scared. Scared and want to go home. My safety is more important than my job.
The direct hits in New York and Washington snarled traffic as far away as Anchorage, Alaska, due to security upgrades at Elmendorf Air Force Base. They caused gas lines in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where prices started at $1.55 and then began climbing. They felt it in Florida. Disney World closed in Orlando, and the Florida Marlins baseball game was canceled. Same thing at Turner Field in Atlanta and every other major league game in the country. First time that's happened since the death of Franklin Roosevelt in 1945. In Los Angeles, the Latin Music Grammy Awards that Carlos Santana was practicing for have been canceled for tonight. Madonna's show has also been called off, and television's glamour event, the Emmy Awards, also canceled for Sunday. In New Mexico, the state fair's been shut down, and in Little Rock...
The pilot says, it's 15 years in flying. I've never seen that, but we're actually going to have to land somewhere else.
Stranded travelers whose planes are grounded scrambled for rooms in an unintended destination. Across America tonight, malls are closed, blood banks are open, and this woman at a gym in Dallas seems to speak for so many.
Your own home is being attacked, basically. I mean, I feel personal. I feel like it's personal. I really do.
For perspective, the Latin Music Grammy Awards we just told you about, one of the many events canceled somewhere in the United States, thousands of miles from here. That event had recently been moved to Los Angeles from Miami due to security concerns. Fair question tonight. How exactly does one now define a safer place in the United States? Dan?
Jim Axelrod from high atop one of the buildings in Midtown, New York, which gives us an opportunity to remind you that television is a bit like a flashlight beam. It can show you what's at the end of that beam, doesn't show you what's at the side of the beam, up or below. And the television cameras have been pointed today at the targets, the World Trade Center here in New York City, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., all of those targets on the East Coast. So it's in wide areas of Manhattan, and most of Manhattan, which is only a part of New York City as a whole, while there's a lot of tension today and a lot of concern for what was happening, obviously, to the country, and particularly on the lower part of Manhattan, that life did go on in most of the city, but all focal points have been and remain tonight on the dead and wounded out of what happened in lower Manhattan and in Washington in the case of the Pentagon. But officials up and down the West Coast found themselves scrambling all day, as well as officials here on the East Coast. Bill Whitaker has been keeping an eye on the West Coast developments. Bill?
Dan, even here 3,000 miles away, the terror struck deep. Airports, businesses, schools across the West closed down. People's reactions, a mixture of fear and anger. Fearing the nation's second largest city might also be a target, workers fled downtown high-rises, leaving the heart of Los Angeles a ghost town. With the Pentagon in flames, giant West Coast defense contractors, Boeing and Raytheon, sent Los Angeles workers home for safety's sake. FBI agents with fingers at the ready ring the main federal building. City government, law enforcement, indeed the entire city was on high alert.
We believe that whatever could have happened in New York could very likely happen here.
The busy borders with Mexico and Canada intensified security and remained open, but little else did. Urban icons, the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco, even Seattle's Space Needle closed down, leaving tourists stunned.
To Pearl Harbor magnified 10 times.
There's heightened alert on the Golden Gate and Bay Bridges, San Francisco's main links. Even Disneyland, the self-proclaimed happiest place on earth, joined other California amusement parks and closed down in fear.
Obviously, what they want is to shut down the country, and that's exactly what they've done.
I mean, it's scary to think that something like this could happen in the United States. I mean, you feel safe here, and now you don't feel as safe.
The West's water and energy suppliers are taking no chances either. At Hoover Dam, boats and bomb-sniffing dogs are on patrol. Armed guards stand outside the San Onofre nuclear plant near San Diego. Up the road, Marine Camp Pendleton is on Threat Condition D, the highest level of alert, meaning an attack is expected or imminent.
Right now, they are checking every car that's on base. We are restricting access if you're not a military affiliated.
This afternoon in Los Angeles, Muslim groups citing death threats said don't blame all for the alleged actions of a few.
The pain of this country is in fact our pain.
Saying there's clearly too much hatred, the Crystal Cathedral in Orange County invited people of all faiths to come together and pray for the victims of today's terror. So here, like the rest of the country, prayers for the victims and concerns for the country's future and safety. Dan?
Bill Whitaker reporting live from Los Angeles. The flow of casualties into New York hospitals has slowed tonight. The flow of casualties from the World Trade Center explosions earlier in the day. But the death toll is mounting at emergency rooms, and hospital officials say that they and we have yet to see a fraction of the dead and wounded. Let me repeat that for emphasis. The hospital officials say that they've up to this moment, they haven't even seen, they've seen only a fraction of the dead and wounded, which gives you some idea of what we need to be prepared to face in the days to come. Dr. James Dillard, a pain specialist who usually works in the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital System but was sent to St. Vincent's Hospital near the World Trade Center to help, said, and I quote him, "I have been in here since this morning. It is like a normal busy day, but it is eerie. We expected to get overwhelmed. It is surreal inside, but there are no sick patients. I think so many people are dead. It's a bad sign that there are no mass casualties, meaning wounded." The doctor saying he sees a lot of dead people, more dead than wounded. Fires continue to rage at the scene of the attacks at the 110-story Twin Towers. The fires have ebbed and flowed during the day, but they're still burning. Much of this prevents police and rescue personnel from getting to the wounded or dead. This is according to witnesses on the scene and our own CBS News correspondents. There are believed people trapped in the rubble, the debris from the collapse of the 3 buildings at the World Trade Center, the 2 Twin Towers, and then World Trade Center building number 7. But police, firemen, and other rescue workers have been unable to get to most of those people who are known to be trapped in the rubble. How many of them, we don't know. Some 50,000 people work in and around the World Trade Center. Many other thousands visit it during the day. All of that contributes to this eerie mood in New York City, and particularly in Lower Manhattan this evening. With us is Fuad Ajami, the distinguished professor at Johns Hopkins University, an expert on the Middle East, and for that matter, an expert on terrorism. Well, as hard as it is to say it, Fuad Ajami, whoever these evil people are who perpetrated this cowardly attack, in many ways they got what they wanted.
Well, they've succeeded. I think we are vulnerable to this kind of new form of warfare that we've been talking about this afternoon together, and you've been talking about. And they have dramatized our vulnerability. And I think to the extent that there is a political message, because if the trail takes us in the direction of Osama bin Laden and his group and the recruits that he finds, then the message is to dramatize our similarity with and affinity with Israel. Because we've been seeing, if you will, a trail of terror hit Israel now for a good deal of time, and now we are victims of this of the same phenomenon. The idea is to underline the oneness, the similarity and the alliance between these two societies. But unless this trail goes cold, and you've been underlining this to us over and over again, unless this trail goes cold, we are really talking about bin Laden and his people, and that's what the reports from Jim Stewart and others have been coming your way.
Well, 2 points. One, as Anthony Mason reminded us, it isn't just the symbolism of the attack now. It has hit the United States at its economic core.
Absolutely.
And what happens when the financial markets reopen, they're not supposed to open tomorrow, maybe not the day after. But it's a hammer lick at so much, but it includes a hammer lick at our economy.
Of course. I mean, the whole idea is our imperium, if you will, is of the NASDAQ variety. We have been happy with our economic performance in the 1990s. We sit astride the world. Our economy is so successful. Our job creation is so successful. There were even arguments that said, now politics is finished in the world. It's now the primacy of geoeconomics. And look at the primacy of geoeconomics. 4 men get on 4 aircrafts and do this to a great, proud, successful nation.
That was in the case of the USS Cole. Today, there's never been a terrorism attack on this scale anywhere in the world.
Absolutely not. But you see, if indeed we go back to this bin Laden base and his group, the so-called Al-Qaeda, which is his followers, these people have grown more brazen and more reckless by the day. The first attacks, to the extent that we can pick up his trail, were the attacks against the U.S. embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, then the attack on the USS Cole, then this. And we've made threats, and we have targeted bin Laden. But these have been pinpricks. There has really been no big price paid for attacks against Americans. I think President Bush is going to be under huge pressure, in effect, to now make good on these threats. This has to be retribution beyond the old raids of the past, if and when we get the trail down right and we know exactly who did this.
If we get the trail down right, and I am going to underscore again, we don't know who did this.
Yes.
Osama bin Laden, his name has been on everybody's lips.
Yes.
But there's no, so far as I know, empirical evidence
yes.
that he's connected to this. The suspicion runs strong, but we've said before, it said after Pearl Harbor, sort of praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. We're now in a position to praise the Lord and let's get some information.
Right. Well, we'd have to unseat the Taliban regime. I mean, this would be, let's be clear about if the evidence and the trail leads us in the direction of bin Laden. And if bin Laden, as we know he is in Afghanistan, you can make a safe bet that the President and the Secretary of Defense and an administration which came in pledged not to be as soft in the world as Bill Clinton was for the 8 years he was around. There will be enormous pressure to unseat the Taliban regime, to go out and find bin Laden. Because bin Laden, we know, is in Afghanistan. Then the pressure will be on this enormous military machine we have, that we have to be protected. And that there is a regime in the world, in many ways friendless, even in the world of Islam. Even the Iranians have no use for the Taliban. They hate them. They think that the Taliban are a disgrace to the world of Islam. And they've criticized the Taliban. So here is this Taliban regime, a regime of radical seminarians. That's what they are. Caught in a war in their own country, over their own country. And you know the land. You've done journalism in Afghanistan. Here is this land which had become a land of brigandage. And now there will be pressure to go out to the source, and the source is the Taliban and the regime.
Fuad Jami, thanks. The President of the United States will be speaking to the nation and the world in about a half hour. You're watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America.